A master arranged a marriage for his daughter, but she chose his strongest slave instead. In the antebellum South, where bloodlines and business deals determined destiny, one woman dared to follow her heart against impossible odds. Eliza Harrington's father saw her as nothing more than a pawn in his empire-building scheme. He never imagined his perfect daughter would risk everything: her wealth, her safety, even her life for forbidden love. What began as a silent rebellion would soon ignite into a dangerous escape that would change their lives forever. Eliza Harrington was the crown jewel of Willow Creek Plantation. With her porcelain skin and refined manners, she was the envy of every Southern belle for miles. But behind her practiced smile lay a woman suffocating in silk and lace, a prisoner in her father's golden cage. Master Harrington's booming voice echoed through the grand hall that spring morning. "It's settled, Eliza. You'll marry Charles Whitmore by summer's end." His eyes gleamed not with fatherly pride, but with cold calculation. Their cotton fields combined with our tobacco be unstoppable. But what her father couldn't see was the terror flashing behind her perfect smile. Charles Whitmore had a reputation that traveled through whispered conversations among House Slavesa men who broke horses and people with equal pleasure. Just last month, a slave girl from his plantation had been found drowned in the river. An accident, they called it. Isn't he this wonderful? News, daughter? Master Harrington's question demanded only one acceptable answer. "Yes, father," Eliza replied, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "I am honored by your wisdom in this matter." Her fingers trembled slightly as she poured his tea, the only visible crack in her flawless performance. That evening, as Charles Whitmore kissed her hand at dinner, his grip tightened just enough to make her wince. His smile never reached his eyes as he whispered, "I look forward to taming such a spirited filly." The dining room erupted in polite laughter while Eliza's world crumbled silently around her. What Eliza's father couldn't see was that his perfect plan had just planted the seeds of its own destruction. Solomon stood in the blazing sun, his broad shoulders glistening with sweat as he loaded cotton bales onto the wagon. At 28, he was Master Harrington's most valuable possession, worth more than any thoroughbred in the stable. His strength was legendary across 3 counties, but it was what he kept hidden that made him truly dangerous, a mind sharp as any plantation owner's, and a spirit that remained unbroken despite the scars that mapped his back. "Solomon!" The dam's breaking by the south field. A young slave boy came running, panic in his eyes. "Master says get there now." Without hesitation, Solomon dropped his work and ran. The south field bordered the main house garden sif. The irrigation dam broke. The flash flood would destroy not just the crops, but potentially reach the house itself. He arrived to find chaos water already breaching the earthen wall, field hands frantically piling sandbags, and there, incongruously among them in her pale blue dress, stood Miss Eliza, her skirts muddied as she passed bags to the workers. "Miss Eliza, you shouldn't be here," Solomon called out, momentarily forgetting his place. Their eyes met across the churning water, perhaps the first time they had truly looked at each other. Something electric passed between them, something neither had words for. The dam wall suddenly gave way. Without thinking, Solomon lunged forward, grabbing Eliza around the waist as the water rushed toward them. They tumbled backward onto higher ground, his body shielding hers from the impact. For 3 dangerous heartbeats, they remained frozen, her delicate hands pressed against his chest, his arms still protective around her, close enough to feel each other's breath. "Thank you," she whispered, and in those 2 words was a humanity he hadn't heard directed at him in years. Solomon quickly set her on her feet and stepped back, eyes downcast. "Forgive me for touching you, miss." But that night, as Eliza sat in her library reading by lamplight, a soft knock came at the door. Solomon stood there, hat in hand, with her muddied book of poetry he'd found by the dam. "I thought you might want this back, Miss Eliza." She should have simply taken it and dismissed him. Instead, she asked, "Can you read, Solomon?" His eyes met hers, wary but unflinching. "Yes, miss." "Which poet do you prefer, Wordsworth or Byron?" The question hung in the air between them, dangerous, impossible, and yet asked all the same. After a long pause, Solomon answered, "Byron speaks more truth about captivity, miss." Their conversations became a secret, ritual brief moments in the garden. Exchanged words while he drove her carriage, whispered discussions about books she would leave accidentally in places he worked. In these stolen moments, they discovered in each other the only authentic connection in their lives of performance and pretense. But these stolen moments were about to become far more dangerous than either of them could have imagined. Charles Whitmore arrived at Willow Creek on a sweltering July afternoon, 3 weeks before the planned wedding. He brought with him a pack of hunting dogsleen, muscular beasts with eyes that seemed to reflect their master's temperament, and 2 personal slaves whose eyes never left the ground. Their backs bore evidence of Charles' displeasure, the scars visible even through their shirts when the breeze caught the fabric just so. "Ah, there's my bride," Charles boomed across the foyer, his voice dripping with possession rather than affection. His boots echoed against the marble floor as he strode toward Eliza, taking her hand and kissing it wetly. "I've come early to ensure everything is to my satisfaction." His eyes raked over her figure with an appraising glance that made her skin crawl. "What a lovely surprise," Eliza managed, the lie bitter on her tongue. She forced her lips into the practiced smile she had perfected over years of Southern etiquette lessons. "We weren't expecting you until next week." "A man should keep his woman on her toes," Charles replied with a wink to her father, who laughed appreciatively. "Besides, I couldn't bear to be parted from such beauty a moment longer than necessary." Master Harrington clapped his future son-in-law on the back. "Come, let's have a drink in my study. I've just received a shipment of excellent bourbon from Kentucky." He turned to Eliza. "Have the kitchen prepare something special for dinner, my dear. Mr. Whitmore deserves our best hospitality." As the men retreated to her father's sanctuary of cigars and business dealings, Eliza caught a glimpse of Charles' slaves being directed to the quarters behind the kitchen. One of them, a woman not much older than Eliza herself, had a fresh bruise blooming across her cheekbone. Their eyes met for the briefest momenta flash of shared understanding between women living under the shadow of the same man, though in vastly different circumstances. That evening, as servants prepared dinner, Charles cornered Eliza in the library. The heavy scent of bourbon preceded him as he closed the door behind him with a decisive click that made her heart stutter. She had been seeking refuge among her beloved books, trying to calm her nerves before facing an entire evening of his company. "I've heard disturbing reports," he said, his voice dangerously soft as he moved closer, trapping her between his body and the mahogany bookcase, "that you've been seen conversing with field hands. That's going to stop immediately." Eliza's heart pounded against her ribs like a caged bird. She tried to step sideways, but his arm shot out, palm flat against the bookshelf, blocking her escape. "I speak with many of the servants about household matters," she replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "It's necessary to run a plantation of this size." Charles' other hand shot out, gripping her wrist with bruising force. His signet ring bit into her flesh. "Don't play coy with me, Eliza. It doesn't suit you." His breath was hot against her face, the smell of spirits nearly overwhelming. "I've specifically heard about a certain slave Solomon, is it? The big one?" His fingers tightened, twisting slightly. "I don't share my possessions, Eliza. Not my horses, not my land, and certainly not my wife." "You re-hurting me," she whispered, hating the tremor in her voice, hating even more the flash of satisfaction that crossed his face at her discomfort. His smile never wavered. "Consider it a gentle reminder of what is expected." He released her wrist, leaving angry red marks that would surely darken to bruises by morning. "I've already spoken to your father about selling that particular slave after our wedding. He fetches a good price in the deep South cotton fields. They work them properly down Thurno, coddling like your father allows." "Father agreed to this?" Eliza asked, unable to mask her horror. Solomon had been at Willow Creek since before she was born. He was the plantation's most valuable worker, the one who kept the other slaves in line while still earning their respect. Your father understands the importance of starting our marriage without distractions. Charles traced a finger along her jawline, a gesture that should have been tender but felt like a threat. He was quite amenable once I explained my concerns, particularly when I offered a very generous price. Solomon is irreplaceable, Eliza argued, immediately regretting the passion in her voice when she saw Charles' eyes narrow. Father relies on him to manage the fields, she added quickly, trying to make it sound like a practical concern rather than a personal one. You will find, my dear, Charles said, stepping back and straightening his waistcoat, that every man has his price, and every slave can be replaced. He moved toward the door, then paused. Oh, and I'll be joining you for your morning ride tomorrow. I'd like to see more of the property that will soon be partly mine. The threat was clear in his tone. He would be watching her. That night, Eliza couldn't sleep. The thought of Solomon being sold south where slaves were worked to death in the brutal heat of Mississippi and Louisiana cotton fields was unbearable. Through her window, she could see torches burning in the slave quarters, where Charles' men were conducting an impromptu inspection of her father's property. She heard a woman's cry cut short, followed by male laughter. Pressing her hands against her ears, she curled into herself, tears streaming silently down her face. For hours she lay awake, her mind racing through options that all led to the same dead end. As the daughter of a plantation owner, she had lived a life of privilege built on the suffering of others. She had told herself that her kindness to the house slaves, her secret teaching of reading to the cook's daughter, somehow absolved her of complicity in the system. But now, faced with Charles Whitmore's cruelty, a cruelty sanctioned and supported by her own father, she could no longer hide behind such flimsy justifications. Dawn found her in the garden, her eyes red-rimmed from tears, her body exhausted but her mind startlingly clear. The early morning mist clung to the rose bushes, beating on the petals like tears. She had come here seeking solace, knowing the house would soon be stirring with preparations for another day of entertaining Charles. Solomon appeared silently beside her, materializing from between the hedgerows like a ghost. His face bore a fresh cut across the cheekbone, crusted with dried blood. His eyes, usually so carefully guarded around white folk, now held something Eliza had never seen before, a raw, barely contained fury. They were going to sell you south, she said without preamble, her voice barely above a whisper. Solomon nodded slowly. I heard. His hands, capable of such gentleness when tending the garden's most delicate blooms, were clenched at his sides. Master Whitmore's man made sure I knew. Said they'd break me proper in Mississippi. It's because of me. Because he suspects. She couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't put into words the unspoken connection that had grown between them over months of furtive conversations about literature, philosophy, and dreams that neither of them had the right to hold. Miss Eliza, Solomon said quietly, his deep voice a rumble that seemed to vibrate through the morning air. I've been sold before. I'll survive. But they both knew what awaited him in the deep South, not just back-breaking labor from dawn till dusk, but systematic breaking of spirit, isolation from anyone who knew him as a person rather than property. No, she said, her voice suddenly firm, surprising even herself with its resolve. No, I won. Let it happen. Solomon looked at her directly then, breaking all rules of propriety. His dark eyes held hers, searching for something. What choice do we have? Your father has already agreed to the sale. By this time next month, I'll be gone, and you will be Mrs. Whitmore. The way he said that name with such controlled hatred made Eliza shiver. She had seen the results of Charles' temper on his personal slaves, had witnessed his casual cruelty to animals and servants alike. The thought of being bound to such a man for life, bearing his children, submitting to his desires night after night. We could leave, she whispered, the words so treasonous she could barely voice them. Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain someone would hear it. Tonight. Solomon's expression remained carefully neutral, but his eyes betrayed his shock. He glanced quickly around the garden, ensuring they were truly alone. You were talking about running away. They would hunt us down. Your father would send men with dogs. And if they caught us, he didn't he need to finish. They both knew the penalty for a slave who fled with a white woman. Death would be the merciful outcome after what they would do to him first. "I can to marry him, Solomon," Eliza said, her voice breaking. She reached out impulsively, touching his arm, another forbidden gesture. "And I can let them send you away. When I—" She stopped, the unspoken truth hovering between them like the morning mist, too dangerous to solidify into words. For a long moment Solomon was silent, his face unreadable. Then, "The North Star rises at 10 tonight. If someone were by the Willow Creek crossing then, with traveling clothes and sensible shoes—" He stepped back, his expression once again properly deferential as a house slave approached along the garden path. "Will there be anything else, Miss Eliza?" "No," she replied, her heart racing with fear and something that felt dangerously like hope. "That will be all." As Solomon walked away, Eliza's mind whirled with possibilities and dangers. She would need money, food, a change of clothes. She would need to avoid Charles' watchful eyes and her father's servants. Most of all, she would need courage, more courage than she had ever needed in her sheltered life. By this time tomorrow, she would either be on her way to freedom or dead for trying. And strangely, as she turned back toward the house where Charles Whitmore waited to claim her, Eliza found herself oddly at peace with either outcome. Better to die reaching for something real than to live a slow death of the soul as Charles Whitmore's wife. The sun broke fully through the morning mist, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. Somewhere in the distance, a whip cracked, followed by a cry of pain. Eliza squared her shoulders and walked toward the house, her decision made. Tonight, everything would change. Darkness fell over Willow Creek like a velvet shroud. The plantation house glowed with lamplight as Eliza sat stiffly through dinner, every minute an eternity. The elaborate meal, 5 courses of southern delicacies prepared by slaves who had been cooking since dawn, felt like torture as she forced herself to take small, ladylike bites while her stomach churned with anxiety. The heavy silver candlesticks that had been in her mother's family for generations cast dancing shadows across the damask tablecloth, making the faces of her father and Charles seem demonic one moment and merely human the next. Charles dominated the conversation, detailing his plans for expanding their combined properties after the wedding, speaking of her father's slaves as if they were already his possession. His voice, which society matrons found so charming, grated on Eliza's nerves like a rusty saw against wood. "I particularly like that arrangement in your north field," Charles said, swirling brandy in his glass, the firelight catching the heavy signet ring on his finger. "Though I work them in longer shifts. Idle hands invite trouble, especially among the more spirited ones." His eyes flickered briefly to Eliza, a subtle reminder of their earlier conversation about Solomon. "Solomon manages the rotation quite effectively," her father replied, oblivious to the undercurrents. He dabbed at his mustache with a monogrammed napkin. "Production has increased every year under his supervision. The man has a good head for numbers, unusual for his kind." Charles' eyes flicked to Eliza again, gauging her reaction. "Yes, well, different management styles. Some prefer to coddle their property, I prefer to maximize investment." He took a deliberate sip of brandy. "Speaking of which, I've arranged for a buyer from Mississippi to evaluate him next week, offering $1,500 quite generous for even a prime field hand." Eliza's fork clattered against her plate, the sound unnaturally loud in the dining room. She could feel the blood draining from her face as the reality of Solomon's fate crystallized. The Mississippi. Plantations were death sentences, places where slaves were worked until they collapsed, then replaced without a second thought. "Excuse me," she murmured, pressing a napkin to her lips with trembling fingers. "I feel suddenly unwell, the delicate constitution of ladies." Charles chuckled to her father, raising his glass in a mock toast. "I'll have my personal physician examine her when we were married. Women need proper medical guidance to manage their nervous dispositions." My mother took to her bed for days until father insisted on a regimen of cold baths and restricted reading material. Eliza's father nodded sagely, as if Charles had spoken profound wisdom rather than patronizing nonsense. "Perhaps you should retire early, daughter," he suggested, his concern perfunctory at best. "You look pale. We can have you sickly for the wedding preparations." Eliza nodded gratefully and rose from the table, careful to keep her movements measured despite her desire to flee the room. "Good night, Father. Mr. Whitmore." She cursed slightly, the gesture as automatic as breathing after years of finishing school. Charles caught her hand as she passed, his grip firm enough to make her bones shift painfully beneath her skin. "Sweet dreams, my dear. I look forward to our ride tomorrow." The threat in his eyes was unmistakable. He would be watching her closely, cataloging her every movement, testing her loyalty. "Yes, of course," she replied, fighting the urge to wrench her hand away. "I'm looking forward to it as well." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue, but Charles seemed satisfied, releasing her with a proprietary smile that made her skin crawl. As she climbed the sweeping staircase to the second floor, she could feel his eyes on her back, assessing her like a prized mare at auction. In her room, Eliza moved with quiet determination, though her heart thundered so loudly she feared the house slaves might hear it through the walls. She changed out of her formal dinner gown, carefully hanging it in the wardrobe to avoid arousing suspicion, and into her plainest day dress of sturdy cotton and muted brown that would attract less attention than her usual pastels. She layered a dark shawl over it, one she used for early morning garden walks when the dew was still heavy. Into a small carpet bag, she packed only essentials, a change of clothes, her most sensible walking boots, her Mother S. locket containing a miniature portrait, the only image she had of the woman who had died bringing her into the world, and the money she'd been secretly saving from her allowance. Nearly $200, a fortune by most standards, and yet pitifully inadequate for what lay ahead. She hesitated, then added the small pearl-handled knife her father had given her for her 16th birthday, meant for opening letters but sharp enough to serve other purposes if necessary. She penned a brief note to her father, her normally elegant handwriting betraying her nerves with its slight tremor. "Forgive me. I cannot marry him. Do not look for me." It was cruel in its brevity, but anything more risked revealing too much. She couldn't bring herself to sign it with love, not when she was about to shatter everything he had planned for her future. Instead, she simply wrote Eliza and placed the note on her dressing table where it would be found in the morning. For a moment, she caught her reflection in the mirror, a pale face framed by dark hair hastily pinned up, eyes wide with fear and determination. Would she even recognize herself a week from now? A month? Would she live long enough to find out? She turned away, unable to bear the questions in her own gaze. As the house settled into silence, Eliza listened intently for any movement in the hallway. Charles was staying in the East Wing guest room, thankfully far from her own chambers. Her father would be in his study with his nightly glass of bourbon, as predictable as the sunrise. The house slaves would be finishing their evening duties before retiring to the separate quarters behind the kitchen. When the grandfather clock in the hallway struck 11, she slipped from her room, carpet bag in hand. She moved silently down the back stairs used by servants, avoiding the third step that always creaked. The kitchen was dark, but she knew its layout intimately from childhood explorations. She collected bread, dried meat, and a small jar of preserves, wrapping them carefully in cloth to prevent noise. On impulse, she added a small packet of tea leaves, a luxury she knew they might not have again for a long time, if ever. Outside, the night air carried the scent of jasmine from the garden and the distant, earthy smell of the tobacco fields. The moon was mercifully obscured by clouds, casting the grounds in deep shadow. Eliza skirted the edge of the garden, keeping to the darkest paths, her heart hammering so loudly she feared it would give her away. A dog barked in the distance, one of Charles' hunting hounds, brought specifically to track runaway slave sand. She froze, pressing herself against a tree trunk, the rough bark catching at her shawl. After an agonizing minute of silence, she continued toward the Willow Creek crossing, a small wooden bridge where the property line met the neighboring plantation. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential witness, every rustle of leaves a pursuer. Once she nearly screamed when an owl swooped low overhead, its wings making a soft whooshing sound in the darkness. Her entire life had been spent on these grounds, yet tonight they seemed alien and threatening. transformed by her own fear and the enormity of what she was about to do. Solomon was already there at the bridge, a dark silhouette against the night sky. He wore sturdy clothes, not the rough garments of field work, but not the livery of house service either, and carried a small bundle tied with twine. His eyes widened slightly at her appearance, as if he hadn't truly believed she would come. "You were here," he said simply, his deep voice barely above a whisper. "Did you doubt I would be?" Eliza asked, suddenly unsure. Had this all been a misunderstanding? Had she risked everything based on a few cryptic words in the garden? "It's different for you," Solomon replied, his expression serious in the dim light. "You were leaving everything: comfort, safety, position, your family name. I'm just exchanging one danger for another." He gestured vaguely northward. "For me, being caught means death, but that's always been true. For you—" He didn't finish the thought, but he didn't need to. If caught, Eliza would face social death at best, commitment to an asylum for female hysteria, or forced marriage to Charles at worst. Her reputation would be destroyed beyond repair, her family name tarnished by association with a runaway slave. No respectable household would employ her, no decent man would marry her. She would become a cautionary tale told to young Southern belles about the dangers of forgetting one's place. "We don't have much time," Eliza whispered, pushing aside these thoughts. "Charles has his men patrolling the slave quarters. They'll notice you were missing at dawn check." Solomon nodded, his expression grim. "We need to reach the river by morning. There's a man friend who works the ferry. If we can get across before they raise the alarm, he might help us. He has sympathies." The word hung between them, laden with meaning. Sympathies that could get a man killed in these parts, especially a black man helping runaways. "How far is the river?" Eliza asked, suddenly aware of how little she knew about the geography beyond Willow Creek's boundaries. Her world had been so carefully circumscribed: visits to neighboring plantations, occasional trips to Richmond for shopping, one memorable journey to Charleston for her cousin's wedding. Beyond that, the world existed only in books and maps. 8 miles east," Solomon replied. "Normally a few hours' walk, but we'll need to avoid the main roads in any settlements. That means cutting through woods, swampland in some parts." Eliza nodded, swallowing hard. Her delicate kid leather walking shoes, practical enough for garden strolls, would be ruined. A trivial concern, she realized with a flash of self-disgust. Solomon was risking his life, and she was worrying about footwear. A twig snapped in the darkness behind them. Solomon tensed, pushing Eliza behind him in one fluid motion, his body instantly alert like a wild animal sensing danger. "Well now, what have we here?" The voice was drawling, amused, and chillingly familiar. Charles Whitmore stepped from the shadows, a pistol gleaming dully in his hand. "A midnight rendezvous? How romantic." His tone was conversational, almost pleasant, which somehow made it all the more terrifying. Eliza's blood turned to ice. "Charles, quiet!" he snapped, his genteel facade evaporating like morning dew in summer heat. "I knew something was amiss when I saw you at dinner." "So transparent, my dear. The sudden illness, the distracted manner." He gestured with the pistol. "Step away from my fiancé, boy." Solomon didn't move, his body still shielding Eliza. She could feel the tension in him, coiled and ready, but he kept his voice respectful. "Mr. Whitmore, Miss Eliza was just—" "I said move." Charles cocked the pistol, the metallic click unnaturally loud in the night stillness. "Or I'll shoot you where you stand and tell everyone I caught you trying to force yourself on my betrothed. No one would question a field slave accosting a white woman. They'd thank me for saving her virtue before they strung you up." "No!" Eliza cried, stepping around Solomon despite his attempt to keep her behind him. "Charles, please. This isn't what you think." "No?" His laugh was ugly, a harsh bark devoid of humor. "You were not running away with a slave? Because that's exactly what it looks like to me." He stepped closer, his eyes cold with fury in the dim light. "Did you really think you could escape me? That I wouldn't have noticed your strange behavior, your sudden illness at dinner? I've had men watching the house since I arrived. I know about your little conversations in the garden, the books you've been leaving for him." Eliza's mind raced desperately for a way out. I was just coming to find you, she improvised, her voice shaking despite her efforts to control it. I saw Solomon leaving and followed to stop him. I was going to raise the alarm. Charles' smile was terrible to behold, a baring of teeth rather than an expression of pleasure. Such a loyal fiancé. Then you won't mind if I put a bullet in this runaway right now. After all, that's the penalty for attempted escape, isn't it? He raised the pistol, aiming directly at Solomon's chest. No! Eliza lunged forward as Charles raised the pistol, her movement throwing off his aim as the shot cracked through the night, shattering the silence like a thunderclap. The bullet splintered the bridge railing, sending wood fragments flying. In that moment of distraction, Solomon moved with lightning speed that belied his size. He tackled Charles, both men crashing to the ground in a tangle of limbs. The pistol skittered away into the darkness, landing somewhere in the underbrush with a muffled thud. They grappled fiercely, Charles' aristocratic upbringing and occasional sporting matches no match for Solomon's raw strength and years of hard labor. Solomon pinned Charles down, his forearm pressed against the plantation owner's throat, cutting off his enraged shouts. "Miss Eliza, run!" he shouted, his voice urgent. "Get to the river. Find Jacob at the ferry. Not without you," she cried, scrambling in the underbrush until her fingers closed around the cold metal of the fallen pistol. She had never fired a weapon in her life, but she gripped it with desperate determination, pointing it vaguely in Charles' direction. Charles bucked and twisted beneath Solomon's weight, his face purpling with rage and lack of oxygen. "You were dead, boy," he wheezed through Solomon's chokehold. "Both of you. My men will hear that shot. They'll be here any minute." As if summoned by his words, shouts and the baying of hounds erupted from the direction of the house. Lanterns bobbed in the distance, moving rapidly toward them through the darkness like malevolent fireflies. "We have to go now," Solomon said, delivering a final blow that left Charles stunned but alive on the ground. Taking Eliza's hand, he pulled her across the bridge and into the dense woods beyond Willow Creek's boundaries. They ran blindly through the forest, branches whipping at their faces and catching on their clothes. Eliza's skirt snagged repeatedly on underbrush, and she wished fervently for the practical trousers men were allowed to wear. The pistol was heavy in her hand, a lethal weight she prayed she wouldn't have to use. The hounds' baying grew closer, their trained noses cutting through the night to follow their scent. "They regaining," Eliza gasped, her breath coming in painful bursts. Her side ached fiercely, and her feet, already blistering in her unsuitable shoes, stumbled on the uneven ground. "The creek," Solomon gasped, pulling her toward the sound of rushing water that grew louder as they ran. "We need to follow it downstream. It will mask our scent." They broke through a line of trees and found themselves at the edge of the creek swollen from recent rains, its dark waters churning with hidden currents. Without hesitation, Solomon led her into the water, both of them gasping at the shock of cold. The creek was deeper than it appeared, the current stronger than expected. Eliza stumbled, nearly falling, but Solomon's strong hand steadied her. "Hold on to me," he instructed, guiding her through the treacherous water. The creek bed was slippery with moss and hidden rocks, threatening to upend them with every step. They waded downstream, each step taking them further from Willow Creek and the life Eliza had always known. The icy water numbed Eliza's legs, making each movement more difficult than the last. Her sodden skirts dragged at her like weights, threatening to pull her under. Once, she slipped on a submerged rock and went down to her knees, the current nearly sweeping her away before Solomon caught her arm and hauled her back to her feet. "Just a little further," he encouraged, though she could hear the strain in his voice. They wouldn't bring the dogs into water this fast. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit continued, but grew more distant as the creek carried their scent away. Voices shouted in confusion, the dogs baying turning to frustrated howls as they lost the trail. After what seemed like hours, Solomon guided them toward a low bank where a fallen tree created a natural bridge. "Here," he said, helping her climb onto the massive trunk. "We can cross and double back a bit. They'll expect us to keep heading east." Eliza nodded, too exhausted for words. She crawled along the log, her numb fingers gripping the rough bark. On the opposite bank, she collapsed momentarily onto the damp earth, her entire body trembling with cold and exertion. Her fine leather shoes were ruined beyond repair, her dress heavy with water and mud. But as Solomon helped her to her feet, their hands clasped tightly together, she felt a wild, terrifying freedom, unlike anything she'd ever known. They paused in a small clearing, catching their breath. The distant baying of hounds had faded to an occasional mournful howl, but they couldn't risk stopping for long. The gunshot would have alerted not just Charles' men, but potentially neighboring plantations as well. By dawn, every white man in the county might be looking for them. "Are you all right?" Solomon asked, his eyes searching her face in the darkness. His own face bore a scratch from a low-hanging branch, a thin line of blood black against his skin in the dim light. Eliza tried to speak, but a sob escaped instead. The enormity of what they'd done, what they were doing, crashed over her like a wave. She had just abandoned her home, her father, her entire world. There would be no going back, no possibility of reconciliation. Even if she returned now, claimed she had been forced or confused, the stain on her character would never fade. Solomon hesitated, then gently took her hand. His palm was rough with calluses from years of labor, warm despite the creek's chill. "We can still turn back," he said quietly, his expression unreadable in the darkness. "You could say I forced you, that you escaped from me and were trying to get home. They would believe that." The offer stunned her that even now, he would risk his certain death to give her a way back to her old life. It was this, more than anything, that strengthened her resolve. Eliza shook her head fiercely. "No, there's nothing back there for me but a living death." She squeezed his hand, feeling the strength in it, the humanity that her world had tried to deny. "I've made my choice." For the first time that night, Solomon smiled a genuine expression that transformed his face, erasing years of careful blankness. "Then we keep moving. The river is still 5 miles east. If we reach it by dawn, we have a chance." "What happens at the river?" Eliza asked, trying to focus on the immediate future rather than the overwhelming uncertainty beyond. "Jacob works the Millerton ferry," Solomon explained as they began moving again, more carefully now through the unfamiliar forest. "He's part of the network people who help folks like us get north. If we can reach him, he might be able to hide us until nightfall, then point us to the next safe house." "The Underground Railroad," Eliza whispered. She had heard rumors of its existence, whispered conversations among plantation owners about slaves disappearing, theories about northern abolitionists infiltrating the South to steal valuable property. She had never imagined she would be relying on it herself. "Yes," Solomon confirmed, "though it's not as organized as white folks think, just good people doing what they can when they can, each helping the next along the way." As they made their way through the forest, Solomon occasionally stopped to listen, his senses attuned to dangers Eliza couldn't perceive. Once he pulled her down into a dense thicket just moments before a mounted patrol passed nearby, the horses' hooves thundering along a dirt track not 20 yards from their hiding place. Another time, he identified edible berries growing along their path, the tart juice easing their parched throats. "How do you know so much about surviving out here?" Eliza asked during a brief rest, watching him fashion a crude walking stick for her from a fallen branch. "I wasn't always at Willow Creek," Solomon replied, his hands working methodically to strip the smaller branches. "I was born on a plantation in Georgia. When I was 16, my first master lost me in a card game to a man from Virginia. I was marched north in chains with 20 others. 3 died on the journey." His voice was matter-of-fact, but Eliza could hear the old pain beneath the words. "I'm sorry," she said inadequately, realizing how little she knew of his life despite their months of conversations. They had discussed literature, philosophy, even politics, but never the brutal realities of his existence. Solomon shrugged. "I ran away twice from that second master. First time, I made it 3 days before. The dogs found me. Second time, almost a week. That's when I learned about water hiding your scent, about which plants you can eat and which will make you sick." He handed her the finished walking stick. The whipping after that second escape nearly killed me. That's when he sold me to your father damaged goods, he called me. Eliza took the stick, overwhelmed by the casual recitation of such suffering. I never knew. Why would you? Solomon asked without bitterness. That's not the kind of story told in drawing rooms. As they set off again, moving more carefully now through the unfamiliar forest, Eliza realized that everything she had ever been taught about her place in the world, about the natural order of things, about who deserved freedom and who did not, was unraveling with each step they took. Ahead lay danger, uncertainty, and likely death if they were caught. But for the first time in her life she was moving toward something real, something chosen, rather than the gilded cage that had been prepared for her. The weight of the pistol in her pocket reminded her that she had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. If necessary, would she use it? Against Charles, against the slave catchers, against anyone who tried to take this newfound freedom away? The question haunted her as they pushed eastward through the night. Dawn was breaking as they finally glimpsed the wide, muddy expanse of the river through the trees, its waters glowing amber in the early light. On the opposite bank lay the North Knot Freedom exactly, not with the fugitive slave law still in effect, but at least a fighting chance. Somewhere beyond that distant shore lay Pennsylvania, Ohio, perhaps even Canada, eventually places where Solomon might walk as a man rather than property, where Eliza might find a life defined by her own choices rather than the expectations of Southern womanhood. But first, they had to cross that expanse of water, and the ferry dock, now visible in the strengthening light, was already busy with early morning activity. Workers loaded crates onto the flat-bottomed ferry, supervised by a tall black man in a worn Captain S hat, who Eliza assumed must be Jacob. On the near bank, two men on horseback watched the proceedings with the unmistakable posture of authority patrol riders, perhaps already alerted to look for runaways. Solomon pulled Eliza back into the shelter of the trees. "We'll have to wait," he whispered, his expression tense. "Too many eyes right now." Eliza nodded, sinking down onto a fallen log, her legs trembling with exhaustion. They had been moving all night without rest, and now that they had stopped, every muscle in her body screamed in protest. Her feet were raw and blistered, her hands scratched from branches and briars. She had never been so physically uncomfortable in her entire life, and yet, watching the sun rise over the river that represented their last barrier to at least temporary safety, she felt a strange exhilaration beneath the fear and fatigue. "What will we do once we cross?" she asked softly, watching a flock of birds wheel above the water. Solomon settled beside her, his own exhaustion evident in the slump of his powerful shoulders. "Keep moving north," he said simply. "There are communities-free black settlements, Quaker towns that help runaways. If we can reach one of those—" He trailed off, perhaps unwilling to voice too much hope. "And then?" Eliza pressed, needing to hear some vision of a future beyond the immediate danger. Solomon was silent for a long moment. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "I never let myself think that far ahead. Survival was enough." He looked at her, his dark eyes serious. "What about you? You could find a position as a governess, perhaps, in a northern city. Someone with your education, no." Eliza interrupted. "We stay together." The words surprised her with their certainty, but she knew they were true. Whatever lay ahead, danger, hardship, the constant threat of discovery, she couldn't face it alone. And more than that, she didn't want to. Something shifted in Solomon's expression, surprise, followed by a warmth that had nothing to do with the rising sun. He didn't respond directly, but his hand found hers, fingers intertwining with a gentle pressure that said more than words could. They sat in silence as the sun climbed higher, watching the ferry dock for any opportunity, any moment when Jacob might be alone, and they could approach him without being seen by the patrol riders. The day grew warmer, insects buzzing in the underbrush around them. In the distance, they could occasionally hear shouts from the search parties, still combing the woods for any sign of them. "They were not giving up," Eliza murmured, tension coiling in her stomach again after the brief respite. "They won tea," Solomon agreed grimly. "Not with both of us gone." A runaway slave is valuable property, but a white woman gone missing with him? That's a matter of honor now, not just money. As if to confirm his words, a new sound reached them, distinctive baying of hounds, different from the hunting dogs they had evaded earlier. These were bloodhounds, specifically trained to track humans over long distances. They've brought in the professional slave catchers, Solomon said, rising quickly to his feet. We can't wait any longer. We'll have to risk approaching the ferry now. Eliza stood, wincing as her blistered feet protested. How? Those patrol riders are still there. Solomon's expression was grim. I'll create a distraction. When I do, you go directly to Jacob the man in the captain's hat. Tell him Solomon from Willow Creek sent you, and that we need passage on the gospel train. He'll understand. What kind of distraction? Eliza asked, alarmed by the determination in his voice. The kind that will draw every eye away from the dock, Solomon replied, avoiding a direct answer. When it happens, don't hesitate. Don't look back. Just get to Jacob. We go together. Or not at all, Eliza insisted, gripping his arm. I didn't come this far to abandon you now. Solomon looked down at her, his expression softening. You were not abandoning me. You were securing our passage. I'll join you, he promised. Before she could protest further, he leaned down and did the unthinkable. He kissed her, briefly but firmly, on the lips. It was the first time any man had kissed her without permission. The first time a black man had dared touch her in such a way, and yet it felt like the most natural thing in the world. For luck, he said with a small smile, then turned and disappeared into the trees before she could respond. Eliza stood frozen, her fingers touching her lips in wonder and confusion. Then the baying of the hounds grew louder, jolting her back to the present danger. She moved closer to the edge of the tree line, watching the dock, waiting for whatever distraction Solomon planned. She didn't have to wait long. From the opposite direction of their hiding place came a tremendous crash, followed by shouts of alarm. A stack of crates at the far end of the dock had somehow collapsed, spilling their contents, what looked like apples or some other round fruit, across the wooden planks and into the water. The patrol riders immediately turned their horses toward the commotion. Workers scrambled to contain the rolling produce, and in the midst of it all, Eliza glimpsed Solomon slipping away from the scene, having apparently caused the disruption. Taking a deep breath, Eliza stepped out of the trees and walked as calmly as she could toward the dock, keeping her head down, trying to look like a local woman on a legitimate errand, rather than a fugitive. Her heart hammered in her chest with each step, but she forced herself to maintain a steady pace, not too fast to attract attention, not too slow to suggest hesitation. Jacob, the ferry operator, was directing the cleanup effort, his back to her as she approached. When she was just a few feet away, he turned suddenly, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of her mud-stained dress and disheveled appearance. "Excuse me," Eliza said, keeping her voice low. "Solomon from Willow Creek sent me. We need passage on the gospel train." The unfamiliar phrase felt strange on her tongue, but she saw immediate recognition in Jacob's eyes. He glanced quickly at the patrol riders, still distracted by the spilled cargo, then back to her. "Wait by the small shed," he murmured, barely moving his lips. "When I give the signal, I'll drop my hay-tron for the ferry, not before." Eliza nodded slightly and moved toward the weathered shed that stood at the edge of the dock. Her every instinct screamed to look for Solomon, to make sure he was safe, but she resisted, knowing any obvious searching would draw unwanted attention. The minutes crawled by as workers continued cleaning up the spilled cargo. The patrol riders had dismounted to help, apparently deciding that community assistance would better serve their image than standing aloof. Jacob moved among the workers, directing efforts, occasionally glancing toward the shed where Eliza waited. Where was Solomon? The hounds sounded closer now, their baying taking on the excited tone that meant they had found a scent. Eliza's hands clenched into fists, her nails digging into her palms as she fought the urge to call out for him. Suddenly there was a commotion at the tree-lined shouts and the sound of crashing underbrush. Solomon burst from the forest, running full tilt toward the dock, two men with rifles close behind him. The patrol riders spotted him immediately, abandoning their helpful facade to draw their own weapons. "Run away! Stop him!" one shouted, leveling his pistol. At that same moment, Jacob dropped his hat. The signal. Eliza darted from beside the shed, running toward the ferry, which was already pulling away from the dock under the guidance of Jacob's assistant. A gap of dark water widened between vessel and shore. Solomon changed direction, angling toward the departing ferry rather than the dock. The patrol riders fired, shots cracking through the air. One bullet splintered the wood of the ferry S, railing inches from Eliza's head. Another kicked up water near Solomon as he reached the edge of the dock and, without hesitation, launched himself into the air. For one heart-stopping moment he seemed suspended above the churning river, silhouetted against the morning sky. Then he crashed into the water beside the ferry, disappearing beneath the surface. "Solomon!" Eliza screamed, scanning the water desperately for any sign of him. Long seconds passed. The patrol riders continued firing from the dock, forcing Jacob and his assistant to take cover. The hounds reached the shoreline, baying frantically at the water, and still, no sign of Solomon. Then, just as despair began to overwhelm her, a hand appeared at the far side of the ferry, gripping the edge. With the last of his strength, Solomon pulled himself up and over the railing, collapsing onto the deck in a sodden heap. Eliza rushed to him, heedless of the bullets still occasionally whizzing overhead. "Are you hit?" she demanded, running her hands over him, searching for wounds. Solomon coughed up river water, shaking his head. "Just winded," he gasped. "Can T swim?" "Very well." Relief washed over her so intensely that she laughed through sudden tears. "You jumped into a river when you can T swim?" Seemed better than staying. "To be shot," he managed, a ghost of a smile crossing his exhausted face. As the ferry moved steadily toward the northern shore, the sounds of pursuit faded behind them. Jacob approached, offering Solomon a hand up and a blanket for Eliza. "You two picked a fine morning for a crossing," he said dryly. "Half the county's out looking for you. Will they follow across the river?" Eliza asked, pulling the rough blanket around her shoulders. Jacob shook his head. "Not immediately. They'll need to get permission from the authorities on the other side, arrange a formal search party. That gives you a few hours head start at least." "Where do we go from here?" Solomon asked, still breathing heavily but recovering. "I have a wagon waiting," Jacob replied. "My cousin will take you to the next safe house about 15 miles north. From there, others will guide you." He looked at them both, his expression serious. "It wasn't to be easy. They'll keep looking especially for you two. A white woman and a black man traveling together attracts attention, even in free states." Eliza reached for Solomon's hand, finding it without looking. "We understand the risk." Jacob nodded, a hint of respect in his eyes. "I'll tell you what I tell everyone who crosses on my ferry." The wagon rattled over rough roads as Eliza and Solomon huddled beneath burlap sacks in the back. Jacob's cousin Micah drove slowly, presenting the appearance of a farmer rather than a conductor on the Underground Railroad. "Stay down," Micah had instructed. "Patrols will be thick today." The wagon stopped. Voices approached. "Morning, sir," came Micah's drawl. "Something wrong?" "Checking all vehicles," replied a gruff voice. "Runaway slave with a white woman. Kidnapped her from her plantation. Ain't to see nothing like that." "Mind if we take a look?" Through a gap in the burlap, Eliza saw a militiaman peering into the wagon. Solomon's hand found hers, anchoring her. "What's under there?" the militiaman asked. "Just straw for the horse," Micah replied. The militiaman stepped back. "Keep your eyes open. There's a reward 500 for the slave, 1,000 for the woman." The wagon continued. By late afternoon, Micah pulled into a grove of trees. "Miller's Creek," he said. "You'll have to go on foot from here. Follow the creek north until you reach a split oak. Turn east to a farmhouse with a red door. Ask for Martha." "Thank you," Solomon said, clasping the man's hand. "God go with you both. You've a hard road ahead." They followed the creek through dense forest. Solomon noticed Eliza's blistered feet and knelt to bathe them. "How did you learn to do this?" she asked. When you march 20 miles in chains, you learn about foot care quickly. After an hour, they found the split oak and turned east, eventually reaching a modest farmhouse with a red door. Solomon knocked. "Who's there?" A woman called. "Travelers. Jacob sent us. We were looking for Martha." The door opened to reveal a middle-aged woman with shrewd eyes. "You were the ones they re hunting," she said. "They re saying he kidnapped you." "That's a lie," Eliza replied firmly. "I left willingly." Martha let them in and fed them stew and bread. "You can stay here," she said. "This place is watched too closely. Is there anywhere safe we can go?" Solomon asked. "Canada's your best bet, but it's a hard journey. There's a Quaker settlement about 40 miles north. They might take you in, create papers for you both." Martha's son Daniel returned, with news of riders approaching. "Take them to the Jenkins place," Martha instructed, giving them fresh clothes and gold rings. "Put these on. You're a husband and wife, a free black man and his white wife from Canada." "Sarah and Samuel Jenkins," Eliza repeated, testing their new names. Daniel led them to a burned-out homestead. Jenkins was a station master. Night riders came last spring. Nobody's rebuilt. Locals avoided. In the root cellar beneath the ruins, Eliza and Solomon settled for the night. "Do you think we'll make it?" Eliza asked. "To freedom?" "When I was a boy, my grandmother taught me to find the North Star, the one fixed point in the night sky," Solomon replied. "I don't know if we'll make it, but I know we have to try." Eliza reached for his hand in the darkness, the gold band glinting dully. "Then we follow the star," she said, "together." Outside, through a crack in the cellar door, the North Star shone steadily as they rested on the first night of their journey toward a new world. Dawn broke with mist clinging to the ground as Eliza and Solomon emerged from the root cellar. They ate sparingly before setting out northward. "Keep the creek to our right," Solomon said. 10 miles, then look for 3 pines." By midday, Eliza struggled to maintain pace. "We should rest," Solomon suggested. "No," she insisted. "Every minute increases the chance of capture. A short rest now prevents a longer delay later," he said firmly. As they sat beside the creek, Solomon spoke. "When we reach the settlement, you could stay there. Find work as a teacher. Are you trying to leave me behind? I'm trying to give you options. The journey to Canada will be difficult. Then I'll keep moving too," Eliza said firmly. "We made a pact, together." They continued until they spotted 3 towering pines, then turned east. As dusk approached, they found a wagon road. "North," Solomon said, "but we should wait until dark." After nightfall, they followed the road until Solomon stopped, hearing singing carried on the breeze. "Amazing grace," Eliza murmured. "We were close." They approached a cluster of buildings, a meeting house surrounded by modest homes. At the nearest house, the door opened before they could knock. "Thee are welcome here, friends," said a gray-bearded man. "We've been expecting thee. I am Ezekiel Cooper." Inside, Ezekiel's wife Ruth served them food. "Martha's son reached us this morning," Ezekiel explained. "He warned us thee were coming." That night, in the small room with its single bed, Solomon offered to sleep on the floor. "Don't be ridiculous," Eliza replied. "We were supposed to be husband and wife after all." As they lay in darkness, Eliza whispered, "Thank you for everything. Thank you for seeing me." Solomon replied softly, "Not just looking, but seeing." She reached across, her hand finding his. They fell asleep connected by that small, defiant point of contact. For 3 days, they prepared for their journey. Eliza learned to modify her speech and perform household tasks, while Solomon worked with the settlement's carpenter. On the 4th night, Solomon said, "Benjamin finished the papers today. We leave tomorrow at dawn. Who will guide us? A man named Isaiah. He trades along the route to Pennsylvania." Solomon hesitated. "This is your last chance to reconsider. You could stay here." "My name is Sarah Jenkins," she said firmly, "and I am going with my husband." At dawn, Ezekiel presented them with papers identifying them as Samuel and Sarah Jenkins of Toronto. In the yard, a wagon waited with a weathered man named Isaiah. As they pulled away from the settlement, Ezekiel called after them, "Keep thy eyes fixed on the light." Even in darkness, it guides thee home. Eliza felt Solomon S. hand find hers between them on the seat. One step at a time, he murmured. Eliza nodded as the rising sun cast long shadows before them. One step at a time.